Has anyone noticed that Stack Overflow just isn't that useful anymore when trying to solve problems? More and more, I'm finding myself jumping onto GitHub issues, or maybe something even different, to be able to get the answer to my question. I'll ask maybe a Reddit community, or I'll jump on Discord and ask some of the community contributors on there. I even might just talk directly to the developers on Twitter. And this is today's topic. It's something that I asked on Twitter. I put in the query about what people think about Stack Overflow and if they're still using it. And I got an overwhelming response. It seemed to have resonated with a lot of people. And essentially, there's lots of different reasons why people are no longer using it like they used to be. And I wanted to have a look at that and explore the reasons behind it in this video. I've got a number of different ideas here that people posted up, and hopefully this gives you a better understanding of why people are no longer using Stack Overflow to find the answers to the problems they're having. So what led me to this realization? Well, for me personally, I was working on a React Native project where I wanted users to be able to log in using maybe WordPress login user details. Now that's a pretty specific example. But when I Googled it I found a few Stack Overflow options, and they didn't work out for me. Then I jumped onto GitHub issues, and I thought I found some really good ideas on there. I put those together with some really good documentation from the WordPress website, and I just built my own API. Now, for that, there was no real solution on Stack Overflow. I didn't find anything, and it sort of made me think that maybe those solutions just don't exist on there anymore. And they won't in the future either. So then it made me think that what'll happen to Stack Overflow for the future? Will it still be relevant? And this is where I got lots of different types of responses. Let's go through some of the things that people have said in terms of Stack Overflow and its usability now and into the future. Now, if you don't know who I am, I'm Adrian from Australia. I do videos around design and development. So if you haven't already, hit like and subscribe, and let's just jump back into it. So the very first point that a lot of people brought up that I personally really liked was that Stack Overflow is more for junior developers or when you're starting out. A lot of the queries on there are beginner things on, say, JavaScript or PHP, where you might not understand how a certain function works or how to execute a certain command to fulfill something out. And with these questions, they get asked over and over, especially when you're starting out. This has brought up a lot of SEO where the answers on those are on Stack Overflow and have been for years. They get constantly seeked out and answered on there. So when you get to a certain point as a developer, you're no longer asking those questions. The questions you're now asking are a lot more complex, and those aren't actually found on Stack Overflow. So both the fact that you don't need those early questions and you've got more complex questions means you're no longer using Stack Overflow. It's still useful if you're, say, maybe looking up something on JavaScript or something basic on PHP. But for more complex questions on libraries or resources, things like React Native or maybe a library such as Next.js, you just won't find that sort of stuff anymore on Stack Overflow, and you'll have to move to something newer, such as GitHub issues. And this is the second point that a lot of people brought up. It's that new technology isn't well represented on Stack Overflow. Yes, you can find maybe the answers to Android apps on there, but if you move forward to, say, React Native, that's no longer found on Stack Overflow. You're going to have to jump on GitHub issues or maybe even talk to the community directly on Reddit in order to pose your question. And this means that newer technologies are constantly coming out. You've got things like Gatsby or Next.js, and those aren't represented either. They have great communities behind them and lots of issues that get resolved on GitHub issues. But on Stack Overflow, you just won't see them shown up as often. And this brings me to my next point, which is that a lot of libraries now exist on GitHub, and the developers that actually build them are on there as well. So if you want a carousel, say in React, and you need to figure out an issue you're having, you're not going to jump on Stack Overflow and expect the developer who created that library to answer your question. You're going to ask them directly on GitHub, and you'll actually have confidence that they're going to reply to you. And it's that sort of a community that is built up around GitHub now. where you really have trust in the developers. They'll be the ones answering your questions when you have issues, and even if they're not, then the community will come in and they'll help you out as well. With the things on Stack Overflow, you don't have that same level of trust that the developers of the community will come in as effectively to answer your question. And that's another point that I wanted to bring up. And it's the fact that when an answer gets posed and answered on Stack Overflow, the level of that answer isn't always as reliable as when you jump on GitHub. That level of answer is essentially varied based on who's voting for it. So you don't really know if that's the true answer or if it's just what people expect to be true. On GitHub, you actually get a green thumbs up of the developers where they believe that the answer is correct. You get thumbs up from the community, and you really know if you're on track to solve your issue. You get better feedback on the date of issues as well, because you can have a look at when this issue occurred, and on GitHub it tells you what's going on and if there's been a patch applied. But on Stack Overflow, you don't get that same level of date and hierarchy. Your question might have been posed maybe 5 years ago and it's no longer relevant, or it might be brand new and the answer doesn't exist yet, and you don't know what's going on. So because of that, I find that the Stack Overflow answers just aren't always as reliable as you might want them to be. One thing that I've noticed recently is that a lot of websites actually have really good documentation for their libraries or languages. And this is something that didn't used to be around as well in the past. In the past, you wouldn't understand how to carry out a certain function, and sometimes the answer on the documentation just wasn't thorough enough to help you out. So you would jump on Stack Overflow and pose the question, and usually you'd get a few different responses. But now, libraries and languages have great documentation. A lot of the times they have example code of what's happening, and they have all the variables as well as what they could be in order to change how a certain function or library works. And this is great. It also means that Stack Overflow isn't used as much anymore to ask those questions. If you need a feature implemented, you can be pretty confident that there'll be a use case or an example in the library you're using, and you can copy that straight across and implement it for your project. And this is really great, and I think that it also makes it so that even if you don't know how to implement something, and you apply it and ask about it in GitHub issues, then the community or even the developers will actually get back to you and tell you how it's done, and they'll even update their own examples to include that in the future. And this is great. There is one part to this, which is my next point, that is a little bit unfortunate. And it's the fact that a lot of the Twitter responses said that the overall community on Stack Overflow just isn't that positive anymore. It means that when you ask a question, you don't really have that confidence it'll be answered. A lot of people came back and said that they were just closed or marked as duplicate, and you don't have an answer to your question. On GitHub, you'll get linked to maybe the answer. But on Stack Overflow, someone might even post as a joke or just not be very helpful in general. And this is unfortunate. It also means that it's a reflection of the community. As the Stack Overflow community has aged, it looks like it hasn't gone in a very good direction. In contrast, you'll have GitHub and their community is great. You'll have lots of support from developers and other contributors, and it makes you feel a lot safer and comfortable asking questions on there in comparison to Stack Overflow. Back in 2018, there was a little bit of hope. The CEO of Stack Overflow said that their community wasn't that positive anymore. He acknowledged it and said that they would work towards improving. Now, unfortunately, this was 2 years ago and nothing has really changed. In comparison, you'll have GitHub, which was acquired by Microsoft. They're constantly adding new features and functionality, and they have a great community which is supportive in the background. The difference between these two mean that a lot of people are slowly moving away from Stack Overflow and towards GitHub. And it also shows that maybe there is no confidence in Stack Overflow changing for the future. So you have to really ask, what is going on there? Is there going to be change, or is this just an empty post that doesn't really have any action behind it? There really isn't one single answer to this, and everyone has their own preference. I'd love to hear what you guys are doing. Do you guys still use Stack Overflow a lot, or have you moved on and most of the questions you're now asking are on GitHub issues or maybe even on a subreddit? Anyway, I'll leave a description on the video with a link to the Twitter post I made so you can check out some of the real responses people gave. If you like this video, leave a like, maybe even subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.